Amen. So we're in a series right now called War of the Words. It's called War of the Words, and it's all about this battle that is going on inside of us about what words that we're going to use on a daily basis. What words are we going to let out of our mouths? It's this battle between the words that you should say and the words that you want to say in that moment. It's the battle between the words that you know are right to speak and the words that bubble up and churn inside you when life is coming at you 100 miles an hour. And you all know what this is like because you experience this every day just like I do. It is a battle between the words of life and the words of death. And this battle is going on inside every single one of us every day. And we keep coming back to this same picture since the start of this series about our words as seeds. And every day when you and I speak, we are speaking either the seeds of life or we are speaking the seeds of death. Every day we are carrying around with us two buckets and we're either digging our hands deep into a bucket filled with the seeds of life or we are digging our hand deep into a bucket that is filled with the seeds of death and we are just scattering them around our lives. Whether we realize it or not, this is what we're doing at our workplace. Whatever we're speaking, the words that are coming out of our mouth are scattering seeds. We're doing this at home with our wives and our husbands and with our kids, all around our neighbors and our friends. We're scattering seeds. And the question isn't whether or not you are sowing. The question is, what kind of seed? And so the question that I've been asking you all the way along this is, what do you want to grow? What do you want to grow all around you? What do you want to grow in your family? Church, what do you want to grow? Do you want life to grow around you? Yes or no? If you want life to grow, then life is what you need to sow. Does that make sense? If life is what you want to grow around you, it doesn't happen by accident. It's not happenstance. If life is what you want to grow, then life is what you need to sow, and you need to sow the words of life and the people and the places and the situations that are around you. If life is what you want to grow, then life is what you need to sow. And today we're going to pick up from there. We're going to pick up from this idea that we have been working with in this picture. And we're going to talk about what kind of speech actually falls into the category of life. And we're going to find out what kind of speech actually falls into the category of death and decay. Because we can talk about these things in abstracts. We can talk about them holistically, but sometimes you need to get right down to the nitty-gritty of what does this mean? What does it mean practically? What does it mean and what does it look like to speak words of life? And what does it mean to speak words of death? What does this decay look like that comes out of our mouth? What do these words look like that spread gangrene and infect the people around us? And before we get into that, the first thing that I need you and that I need myself to realize this morning is this, is that there is no such thing as an idle word. Did you know that? There is no such thing as an idle word. There is no such thing as a word that you just throw away and sow away. There is no such thing as an idle word. So don't know about you, but me and technology have a bit of a love-hate relationship. Anybody else in this room have a love-hate relationship with technology? There are some things about technology that are just my favorite new inventions of all time, like tap technology on my credit card. That is my favorite new invention of the last 10 years, hands down. I had no idea how much time I was wasting every day by punching 4 numbers into a little box. At the end of every day, I get like 20 or 30 seconds back because I can just pull this out and I can tap it. And some of you in this room, you get like 3 or 4 minutes back the amount that you use your credit card, right? That's a lot of time, 3 or 4 minutes every single day. There are some things that I love about technology, but there are also some things that to be honest, they just frighten me a little bit. And one thing that frightens me, you're going to find this maybe a little odd, but Alexa frightens me. How many of you know what Alexa is? Alexa is the virtual assistant for Amazon. It's kind of like Apple's Siri. And you can buy these boxes and you can put them in your house. You can set them on your mantle. You can put them in your bedroom. And they're not really boxes. They're little dots. And you can speak to this box wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and all of a sudden it'll talk back to you. It's like having a friend in a little box like this. And this friend can do amazing things for you. You can say, Alexa, and she will say, what can I do for you? And you can say, turn on some music. I would like you to play this. Or you can say, Alexa, order me some paper towels because I've run out. You can ask Alexa to do all sorts of different things, and it's not just this virtual assistant, but Siri, you can tell her to send texts and emails to people, and you can do all of these things without ever touching a button. Isn't that amazing? You can do all of these things by just speaking out into the air. Now, do you know why this thing works? Do you know what's happening that makes this possible? These little boxes are listening to every word that you say. Does that scare anybody else here, or is this just me? These boxes, they are listening to every word you say. They don't just turn on when you say the name Alexa. They don't just turn on when you say, hey Siri. They are listening to every single word that comes out of your mouth. And I don't know about you, but I don't like that. They say that they're just listening to help you, but how do we really know that? How do we really know what's happening to all this information? I'm not trying to go all big brother on you, but who knows what happens to all of these things that you say to your wife or to your husband or to your kids? I'll tell you this much, I don't want anyone listening to my every single word. You're laughing because you know this is true. See, Mel and I have made a pact together that we are never, ever going to get one of these boxes. We will never have Alexa, and we try and turn Siri off if we can, because here's the thing that we are petrified about more than anything. We are going to say something ridiculous, and then I'm going to hear Alexa say, okay, I sent that to all of your contacts. And I'm going to be like, no, please don't do that. I'm going to say something stupid to my hamster or gerbil or chinchilla or who knows what I said, and all of a sudden Alexa's going to think, yes, I'd like you to send this to all of your contacts, and I'm going to run across the room, and it's going to be too late. Because whatever I said is out, and not just out, it has been broadcast to the entire world. There was this really funny story I found about Siri accidentally texting a man's wife, and he was a trombone player. You know the trombone? And he sat down to practice one day, and somehow Siri interpreted this as a text that he wanted to send. So his wife got hundreds of times over and over, womp, 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 womp. Do you think he intended to send that? Why do you think Siri would send that? Who knows? But she's listening. She's listening to everything that you say. So Mel and I have this running joke inside of our house. When we say something that sounds funny that nobody else would understand, we just say out loud, Alexa, don't record that. Alexa, don't record that. We don't even have Alexa, but it's this running joke in our house where we say, Alexa, do not send that to all of our contacts. Please, Alexa, don't. You'd be surprised how many weird things you say when nobody else is listening. You see, it's a crazy thing to think that someone is listening to our every word, isn't it, church? It is a mind-boggling thing to think that someone or something is listening to every word that comes out of your mouth. And yet, if you read the Bible, you will realize that this has always been the case. If you read your Bible, you will realize that this has always been the truth. You see, God always has been listening to every word that you have ever said, and God always will be listening to everything that comes out of your mouth. And what you need to realize as followers of Jesus is this, is that there is no such thing as an idle word. Do you understand that? There is no such thing as a throwaway word. There is no such thing as a word that does not matter, that does not have effect, because speech is so powerful that God says that even the careless words that fall out of your mouth, one day He will ask you about. Is that a sobering thought for anybody else in this room? Even those careless words that leak out and squeak out of your mouth in those difficult situations, speech is so powerful that one day God will ask you to give an account for even those words, because the fundamental truth is this: there is no such thing as an idle word. There is no such thing as a useless word. There is no such thing as a throwaway sentence. And when you start to realize that, when you start to get your head wrapped around it, it sure changes dramatically how you use your words. When you start to realize that God is and always has been listening to everything you say, it dramatically changes the types of things that come out of your mouth. Because if you were in a conversation and you were with your friends, and all of a sudden you stopped right there in that conversation and asked yourself this question: if Jesus was standing right here beside me, would I say this thing that is on the tip of my tongue? Would that change some of your conversations? It would change some of mine. If you stood there as you were about to tell this story, or you were about to tell this joke, or you were about to say this thing, or you were about to speak this truth or untruth, if you thought about this question, if Jesus was standing right here beside me right now, would I speak the thing that I am about to say? It would dramatically change the way you use your words. Because here is the truth: there is no such thing is an idle word. God is listening to everything that we say. So Paul gives us some amazing and he gives us some challenging advice about the words that we speak. And you know what? It's actually even stronger than that. It's not just advice. He actually commands us and calls us to do something that if you can get a grip on this morning, it will really alter the way that you use your words. And it is written in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. So let's just read that together this morning. This is from Paul to the church in Ephesus, and this is what he says. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. So Paul uses this fascinating word here in this passage that we translate unwholesome. And it's actually more than just a word. It's actually a word picture. How many of you like word pictures out there? You know how much I like them because I use them all the time. And the word that he uses here for unwholesome is more than just a word. It's a word picture. And it gets translated different ways in different translations. In the RSV, they translate it this way. It's the word evil. Let no evil talk come out of your mouths. In the King James, it gets translated corrupt. Let no corrupt communication proceed from your mouth. And in the NIV, we just use the word unwholesome. Let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. But if you were to flip through the Bible and you were to trace this word's usage, you would get a much better picture of what it means. Because the only other time it's ever used in the Bible is in the Gospels, and the person who uses it is Jesus, and he always uses it to refer to the same thing. Do you know what he's referring to? He's referring to fruit. Every time Jesus uses this word, he is referring to the same thing. He is referring to fruit. And it's not just fruit that he's referring to, it's bad fruit. Do you remember that story that Jesus told about a good tree and a bad tree? A good tree bears what kind of fruit, church? Good fruit. Right? A good tree bears good fruit, and a bad tree, do you know what it bears? Sapros. It's the Greek word for unwholesome. It means bad fruit. The word means rotten. The word means that it is turned. The word means that it's spoiled and gone bad. It's inedible. It's ugly. It's rotten. So really what Paul is saying in this passage, we've translated it all these different ways, but really what he's saying is this. He's saying, don't let any rotten words come out of your mouth. Isn't that a good picture? Don't let any rotten words come out of your mouth. Can you see that in your head? Words that are dead, words that are decaying and spoiled, words that have no life in them whatsoever. And this is what he says to you and me. He says, don't let those words out of your mouth. Don't let those rotten words into the atmosphere. Don't let them escape. They might bubble up inside you. You might hear somebody else say them and it comes back to your memory. They might surface inside you, but do not let those rotten words come out of your mouth. How many of you ever bit your tongue before? Maybe not when you're eating, but like you're in a conversation and somebody says something and you literally had to hold on to your tongue with your teeth because you knew if you didn't, something was going to come out that you didn't want to come out. That is exactly what Paul is talking about right here. He's saying when those words, those rotten words surface, when they make it to the tip of your tongue, hold on, keep them in, shut the gate that is in front of your face, and do not let them out. Now, so often, you see, this is a choice that we make that Paul is telling us about. It's a choice that we make to either speak these words or not speak them, to let them out or to keep them in. And so often, this is what we say to one another. We say, I couldn't help it. Have you ever said that to somebody? I couldn't help but say that thing that I said. I couldn't help it. I got too worked up. I got too mad. I got too upset. I could not help but say those things that I said. But do you know how I know that that's not true? I haven't been hiding and watching you. Don't worry. Do you know how I know that that's not true? Not just because the Bible says it. I know that that's not true because of the way you answer the phone. I know that that's not true because of the way you answer the phone. Have you ever been in an argument before with someone or a heated discussion? You are at the peak of what is happening and all of a sudden the phone rings. What happens? Right? You're in the middle of something, you are at full vent, and you go from full vent to perfectly fine in 1 second flat. You are in the middle of saying, I can't believe you did this. I don't feel like you even thought about me. The phone rings, you say, hello? Hey, how are you? It's been a long time since we had a chance to talk. You're in the middle of saying, if you ever do this again, I don't even know what I'm going to do. Oh, hi, how are you? It's been far too long. Yes, we're on for Thursday. Yes, bridge is my favorite thing to do. No bridge players out there? This is how I know. This is how I know that you can control it. Because so many times in your life you do. So when people say, I couldn't control it, I can't help it, Paul is saying, yes, yes you can. With the power of the Spirit, with what God is doing inside you, you can control those words. You can make the choice to seal that gate that is in front of your mouth. And that is why his advice here is so real and so powerful. And this is simply what he says. He says, those rotten words, when they surface, don't let them out. Do not let them out. Bite your tongue if you have to, but don't let them out. How many of you would benefit from this verse here? I love Psalm 141, verse 3, and this is what David says. He says, set a guard over my mouth, O Lord. Keep watch over my lips. Set a guard in front of my mouth, O Lord. Two big, strong, heavily armed soldiers. Set a guard in front of my mouth, O Lord, and keep watch over my lips. If you want to ask that of God, ask it with David and pray it with him and simply say this, Lord, set a guard over my mouth and keep watch over my lips that I might speak what is right and what is true. Pray that with David. Don't let those rotten words out. Did any of you growing up have your mom wash your mouth out with soap? Did anybody have that delightful experience? I can see a few hands. Did any of you have that experience where you said something and instead of just chastising you, your mom went into the cupboard, got out a bar of soap, and she literally washed your mouth out with soap? Do you know why she did it? This was not just some form of cruel and unusual punishment. Do you know why she did it? She did it because those words on your tongue were rotten and they were going to make you and the people around you sick. That's why she did it. This actually isn't nearly as crazy as we assume that it is. She washed out your mouth because she wanted you to know that those words on your tongue were rotten. And they were going to make you and everyone else around you sick. And she wasn't going to let that happen. So she brought out the dove and she made you remember the story. Trust me, your mom's not as crazy as you once thought. We had a cat years ago. His name was Lemon. Don't ask me why. And he had an incurable taste for human food. The day we brought him into our house, the day we brought him home, we came the next morning and found that he'd eaten an entire box of Kentucky Fried Chicken in the night when we weren't watching him. An entire box. Now, sometimes his weakness for human food got him into all sorts of trouble because one time we had a 6-pound beef roast in the freezer and it had spoiled. I'll give you a moment to feel the pain of that. Someone had given us a hip of beef. I actually know what that is now. And they had given us a hip of beef, and there was so much that we couldn't possibly eat it in 6 months before it went bad. It was just me and my wife at the time. So we had a 6-pound beef roast that went completely bad in the freezer, so we threw it out. And we threw it out, we put it in a garbage bag, and we set it out. And somehow it sat there for 5 or 6 days, just rotting in the daylight. Well, all of a sudden, I got up one morning and I found that bag and I saw that there was a hole chewed in the side about the size of my cat's head. And not only that, he had grabbed this roast that had been sitting there for 6 days and he dragged it out. And I'm not even sure how he did this because it probably weighed more than he did. But he dragged it out and he went to town. And I remember the next morning, it was like a detective. I was walking around going, okay, I see the hole and I see the roast and I see how much I ate. And then I'm like, where is my cat? My first thought was, I don't think he's going to make it. I seen how much damage he had done, and I thought, he is not going to make it. So I walked around and I found him lying on his back with his paws up in the air like this. And he had a glassy-eyed look over his face, and I tried to talk to him, and he didn't move. He just kept taking these slow, shallow breaths. All he was doing for 2 or 3 hours was trying to stay alive. And I don't even think he saw me as I stood there in front of him. He was just comatose, clinging to dear life. Do you know why? Because rotten food will make you sick. It's not complicated, is it? This is what rotten food does, is it makes you sick. And this is what rotten words will do to you, will do to your heart, and will do to the people around you. It will make you sick. It does not nourish. There are no vitamins in it. It will not make you feel better. It does not build you up. It will make you sick. And if you let it out into the atmosphere, it will infect all of the people around you who are listening. And this is what rotten words do to you, and this is what rotten words do to me. And I'm sorry if I gave you that mental image, but I wanted you to have a graphic picture of what God thinks about some of the words that we speak. We are far too tame and we are far too docile about some of the things that come out of our mouths, and this is what God pictures this as because he can see this happening, and half the time he finds you or me lying on the couch with our hands in the air staring off to the ceiling because of something that someone said to us or something that we said to somebody else. This is what rotten words do to you and me. So what does Paul mean by rotten words? What kind of words is he talking about? There are actually examples all throughout Scripture, and we could spend the next 3 sermons talking about this, which we're not. Just a few verses later, he talks about foolish talk. He talks about coarse joking and rough language. And there's a bunch of other places we go, but I thought this morning I want to camp out on 2 things that you and I don't normally assume are rotten words. 2 things that fly under the radar that we don't usually think about. And it'll help you see what God is talking about here this morning. The first one is this. The first one is complaining. Complaining is one of those rotten words that Paul is talking about here, and it is probably last on the list of things that you would think about that might be damaging to your health and to the people who are around you. Complaining is when we are constantly down in the mouth about something. You ever been there before where all you can see is the negative, all you can focus on is the things that aren't going right in your life? It's all you can see, and sometimes it's all you can talk about. And do you know what one of the hardest verses in the entire Bible for me to obey is? Any guesses for this pastor right here? One of the hardest verses in the entire Bible for me to obey. Philippians 2:14. Do everything without complaining. Let's take a moment of silence for that. Do everything without complaining or arguing so that you may become blameless and pure children of God in a crooked and depraved generation. Do everything without complaining. Just so we're clear, how many things? Everything without complaining. I find that verse so hard to live. Because for some reason I just love to complain, and I'm sure there's more out there that are more like me. For some reason, I love to talk about the things that are wrong before I talk about the things that are right. And when I get home at the end of the day, those are the first words out of my mouth, and at the end I'll be like, actually, it was a pretty good day. You know what? Sometimes I feel like complaining so much, I actually feel like complaining about this verse being too hard to actually live out. Do everything without complaining. See, you probably experienced this too. Sometimes I get stuck on the negative. I get focused on the negative, and here's what happens when that happens to you and when it happens to me. When you focus on the negative, it starts to come out of your mouth. Have you noticed that? When you stare at the negative things in your life, it starts to come out of your mouth. And the worst part about that is it starts creating a nasty feedback loop in your life. You get this negative, nasty feedback loop where the more you stare at it, the more you speak it, and the more you speak it, the more you notice it. I want you to pay attention the next time you complain. Because the more you see it, the more you speak it, and the more you speak it, the more you see it. And this feedback loop keeps going and going and going in your life until one day all you can see is the things that are wrong. This is what happens when we complain. And then all of a sudden it starts to rub off on the people around you and infects those around you too. Have you ever hung around somebody who loves to complain? It is the worst thing in the world sometimes. You could be on vacation, and if someone is complaining, it can drag you from this beautiful place all the way down to the depths because they have infected you with rotten words. And why does that happen? Because this is what rotten words do. This is simply how they function. They're rotten. So don't let them out. Paul says, stop them before they get off your tongue. Don't let them out. Another one you might not think about, but absolutely is one of these rotten words, is gossip. Gossip in Greek, do you know what it literally is in Greek? It's the word whisper. It's the word whisper. Gossip is that thing that happens quietly in the corners when somebody else isn't around. And gossip is when we talk about somebody else in a negative way when they're not there with us. When we speak about someone that we might even care about, that we might even love in a negative way when they're not there with us. And I get how hard this one is. It really is. We are relational people, and the most interesting thing in the world to talk about, do you know what it is? Other people. This is just how God has wired us. We care more about the people than we do about the thing. We care about the person more than we care about the situation, so we're so prone and tempted to gossip about other people because they are so very fascinating because of how God has wired us. But Paul is saying here and elsewhere in the Bible, be so careful how you talk about someone who isn't there. Because gossip slips in so quietly. It slips in so undetected. It makes its way into our conversations before we even notice. And I love this one little line. It's almost like a joke. And it's an old lady who comes to her pastor and she says, "Pastor, I never have any trouble with gossip. I really don't. Pastor, I never struggle with gossip. But my neighbor, boy, let me tell you." You see? You see how easily it just slides right in there. A perfectly good and wholesome and right conversation can veer into gossip without anybody even knowing it, and you don't realize till you are knee-deep in something that you should not be in. And the danger is this, with all rotten words, is that it makes things sick. Proverbs 16:28 says this, "Gossip separates close friends." Isn't that the truth? Gossip separates close friends. It takes two people who love and care and respect one another, and all of a sudden it separates them and it tears that relationship apart. Do you know why? Because that word is rotten and it made the relationship sick. Gossip tears apart entire churches. Gossip tears apart marriages. Gossip tears apart families. And church, you are a part of something special here. You are a part of the very bride of Christ, and the people in this room are people that God loves more than you could possibly imagine. So be careful how you speak about someone else when they are not in the room. Be careful what you say, even if you have the best intentions. If you find yourself offering a whole lot of prayer requests, we just need to pray for this person because you should see what they're involved. Oh, dear. Be careful how you speak when someone else isn't the room, because gossip is a community killer. Nothing will kill a church's community faster than words of gossip. Now, for years, I used to have this trouble because I knew gossip was wrong, but I got into all these situations where I never knew how to get out. Have you ever been in a conversation once where someone is gossiping and all you want to do is get out of there and you have no idea how? Like if there was a trap door, you would pull it and you would drop out of the floor so you could remove yourself from the situation, but you couldn't possibly find a way out of this conversation. You see, gossip, how many people does it take to gossip? Actually, it takes two, right? You need someone to speak, and what else do you need? You need someone to listen. So even if you're not the one gossiping, it's still possible for you to participate in this, because if someone else is speaking and you're listening, you're still partaking in this thing that is damaging to someone else. And I never knew how to get out of these conversations without train wrecking the conversation, without saying something horribly offensive to the person that I was talking to. I never knew how to get out. And this week I read something incredible that I want to share with you. It was this amazing way that somebody shared about how to get out of those conversations and exit off when someone else is sliding into gossip. And this is what it is. It is so simple, it'll rock your world that you didn't think of this before. When someone else is being gossiped about, do you know all you have to do? Start saying good things about that person who is being gossiped about. If there's someone who's being thrown under the bus, all you have to do is start saying 2 or 3 good things about that person who is being thrown under the bus, and all of a sudden you're going to watch something incredible happen in that conversation. You don't even have to call them out for what they're saying. You don't even have to identify it for what it is. All you have to do is you have to fight fire with water. You got to fight words of death with words of life. And all of a sudden, if someone is being dragged down, you can just look squarely into that situation. You say, actually, you know what? That person is a great father. Have you ever noticed that before? Actually, that person is such a good businessman. I saw this one time where he could have cheated a customer and he didn't. Boy, that guy is really gifted as a worship leader, don't you think? And all of a sudden, you fight back with the words of life when the words of death are being spoken. And the guy who taught me this said this. He says, try this. Try this and just watch what happens to the situation, because all of a sudden the conversation that was full of gossip, all of a sudden the gossip just dries up. All of a sudden the gossip, when you start speaking words of life about the person who is being talked about, all of a sudden the gossip starts to evaporate, and all of a sudden the conversation shifts, and the person who got dragged into this stuff that maybe they didn't even intend to be in looks at you and says, yeah, I guess you're right. They are pretty great, aren't they? See what happens when you fight words of death with words of life. See, watch gossip run for the hills and watch it hide from the light. You see, whether it's complaining or gossip, or whether it's criticism or coarse joking, whatever the rotten word is, whatever the decaying seed that we use is, the solution is always the same, and this is what it is. Don't let it out. Can you say that with me, church? Don't let it out. Don't let it get into the atmosphere. Don't let it breathe. Don't give it room to spread its wings and fly. Don't let it get airborne. just close the gate and don't let it out. And if you ever notice that these words have somehow snuck into the conversation, and if you end up noticing that somehow you allowed them to come out of your mouth, this is what you do, or somebody else let it get in, this is what you do. You fight back. You fight back with the words of life. You fight back with the seeds of good things. You see, just like negative words have the power to tear down, Paul says this, that positive words have the power to build up. They have the power to impart life. They have the power to encourage somebody when they're down, to build them up when they've been torn back, to speak the right word at the right time in the right situation, to put them on the right track. This is the power of the words of life, and you can use them in defense when the words of death are in the air. So here's my question for you this morning. When you get home from church today, what words are you going to speak? When you get to work tomorrow morning, what words are you going to use? When you're with your family tomorrow night, what words are going to come out of your mouth? Are you going to let complaining ruin your day and everybody else around you? Are you going to let gossip steal from you your absolute closest friends in your church family? Are you going to let criticism tattoo untruth on somebody else's heart? Or are you going to speak words of life to people? Are you going to speak words of truth? Are you going to speak words of encouragement? Are you going to speak life to the people and the situations that are around you? Because this is the opportunity that God has given you every day. This is the chance to turn people towards one of two destinations every single day. You can either set them on the path of life or you can set them on the path of death, and you will do this by the words that you speak to them. And this is the challenge that God gives us every single day. Now, we've spent a lot of time today focused on the harm that the wrong words can do in people's lives, but I want to close by talking to you about the flip side. I want to close with a story that just illustrates what can happen if we actually speak the right words in the right way at the right time. And it was something that God taught me through this move. Can you tell we're moving? I've talked about it in nearly every sermon I've preached for the last month, because these situations are always in front of me and stuff is happening. And I was in the back room where we're storing all of our boxes, and they are piling so high that I can't even see out the window that I once could see out in the back. That's how you know you're getting close to D-Day. And open on one of the back chairs in my back room was one of these boxes, and it was full of important things from our family from the last 20 years. It was full of mementos. It had photo albums in it. It had important mementos and trinkets that we had kept. And sitting on top of this open box, above and beyond everything else, was a colorful cardboard box that I hadn't seen in years. It must have got stowed away some time ago for safekeeping in the most important parts of our house, but I recognized this box immediately because this box was my box. This is a box that I had had, just a small little Bible box that I had had since I was about 15 years old, and it was full of notes. Now, it wasn't full of school notes, it wasn't full of jot notes, it wasn't full of sermon notes. It was actually full of notes that friends of mine had written and people that I cared about and had passed to me. And if you are under the age of 20 today, I want to educate you on something. Before there were cell phones, do you know how we communicated? I feel like an absolute dinosaur having to explain this to you all, but before we had cell phones and you could text anyone, we actually wrote notes to one another. Different sized, anybody else know what I'm talking about? You wrote notes on different sized pieces of paper and different colors, and there was a special way that you could fold these notes so that they were easy to pass in class. You know what I'm talking about, some of you. And this is what we did before cell phones. This is the barbaric way that we communicated before cell phones had changed our lives, and we would pass these notes to one another, and I opened this box, and it was just chock full of these notes. And I hadn't read these in probably 10, maybe 15 years, so I started reading them one by one. And the more I started reading, the more I realized, well, some of them were funny. One of them was from a girl that I liked in grade 7, and I somehow still had this note at the bottom here. It was all written in smelly marker because that's what 12-year-old kids do. I don't know. See, there's no way to do that with a cell phone, hey? There is superior ways of communicating back then. I had notes from close friends of mine and from camp directors, important people in my life. I had all sorts of these notes, and it was packed full. And as I walked all the way through them and I started reading them, do you know what I realized? Of all the notes that I kept, of all the things that meant the world to me, this box was almost completely full of encouragement notes. This box was completely full of things that people had spoken to me at various points in my life that had made a huge difference. I started reading them in the back there, and I'm reading one after another. I'm just standing there in the back by myself, and Mel is calling me saying, supper is ready. I'm like, just a few more, honey, just a few more. And by the way, if I'm ever going to miss dinner, it's for something very important. So this was very, very important. And I'm standing there for what must have been an hour reading note after note after note. One note was from a friend who was thanking me for listening to her when she was having one of the darkest days that she could remember. And all that I did, no fancy thing whatsoever, all I did was listen to her and speak a couple of words of life at the end. And she wrote me this beautiful note afterwards saying, thank you. Some of them were from fellow camp counselors that I worked with, and they were encouraging me because I had a cabin full of kids that were absolute crazy people, and they were 6 years old, and somehow they wanted to keep me from losing my mind, so they wrote notes of encouragement to me, and they put them in my box. I had one note from a camp director that I worked under, and he was identifying gifts that he saw in me. He told me that God has a plan for your life. That God has a plan for your life, and I think you would make an incredible pastor. And one by one, I went through all of these notes, and I stood there, and my heart was just full reading them. And I thought about this afterwards, and you'll understand this too. 16-year-old kids are not overly sentimental, are they? Would you say 16-year-old boys? They're not overly sentimental. In fact, 16-year-old boys don't keep very much. I maybe have 6 things in my entire house that are from this period of time in my life, and do you know what one of them was? It was this box full of these notes, because they had meant so incredibly much to me. I held on to this box and I treasured it. Why? Because it was full of the words that shaped my life. It's full of the words that other people helped use to figure out who I was. It was the words that people spoke into my life at critical moments. It was the words that God used to help me see what He was calling me to and the kind of person that I was. And it just floored me. It absolutely floored me to look at them years later. And I looked at that box and I thought about it this week, and I thought, right there is living proof of the power of the words of life. I am living proof of the power of the words of life. And this is what happens when you and I are willing to reach out and speak the words of life to other people. Here's the crazy thing. Maybe you haven't packed in a little while, but every one of you have one of these boxes. Every one of you have a place in your heart that stores up the words of life that other people have spoken to you. Every one of you have a corner that keeps the words of life that people have spoken, and when you speak the right words at the right time, they will carry them with them the rest of their lives. So here's my word to you today. Here's the thing I want you to remember from all of this. When you feel rotten words bubbling up inside you, when you feel them start to surface, batten down the hatches, bar the gate, lock the handle, and throw away the key. Set 2 heavily armed guards at the gate and do not let them out. When you feel those words start to surface, lock the gate. Throw away the key and do not let them out. But if you feel words coming up inside of you that are words of life, if you feel words coming up inside you that will put wind in somebody else's sails, then let them fly. Let them fly and speak them until there is no more breath left in your lungs, because you have no idea who you might affect. You have no idea who 20 years from now is going to open a box, look inside, and thank God for you and for the things that you said. Speak life, church. Speak life. Let's pray. Father, we thank you. We thank you for this awesome responsibility that you have given us to shape the lives of the people that are around us. But Father, I pray that you would give us wisdom and discernment to know how powerful the words that we speak are. God, I pray that the meditations of our heart and the words of our mouth would be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer, because everything hangs in the balance. In Jesus' name, amen.